Hello everyone, and welcome back to Isaiah for Latter-day Saints. Today we're going to be talking about the next chapter of Isaiah, Isaiah 47, but we have to understand a little bit of historical context here. Some of the difficulties here that we have is Babylon was destroyed by two different groups of people. It was destroyed by the Assyrians. It was also destroyed by the Persians. And so we have actually some complicated things where it looks like maybe it's talking about the destruction of Babylon by the Persians, when actually it's talking about the destruction of Babylon by the Assyrians. And so it becomes a little bit complicated. But the context suggests that this is the Assyrian conquest, not the Babylonian conquest. Like I said last time, we actually have record of the Assyrian king. Sennacherib comes in, and he actually takes the god Marduk and hauls it off to Assyria. So that image of these gods that are just like bouncing up and down on these donkeys and oxen going back somewhere, that's this event, right, of these deities being taken and they're hauled back to Assyria. And so we actually know when this is. In 689 BC. So that's kind of nice to actually be able to put a real pin in the map and say, oh, hey, this is something that happened right around 689 BC. But like I said, some people have tried to put all this into the time of the Persian Empire and the time of Cyrus, when really it seems to fit the context better, actually, in the time of Isaiah, of this exact time. This is actually something where we can kind of put a pin in the map on this and say, yeah, this is probably somewhere around 689 BC, something like that, and something we can really say, yeah, this is the destruction of Babylon by the Assyrians, not by the Persians. And so there's another reason for that. And you remember the scene last time, or a little while ago, he was talking about, this is in 45, actually, where he's talking about the produce of Ethiopia and the Sabians and all this stuff, and they're going to come over and be like, and they're going to be the lords. Why are they in chains, right? And we talked about this of being in slavery. Well, there's a specific reason these guys were in slavery, and that is actually due to something that really happened in the Assyrian Empire, actually. But the reason that these Egyptians are in chains is literally because they've been taken captive by the Assyrians. We actually have record of this happening on a number of different occasions. Sometimes they're calling them Ethiopians, but that's Cush, right? That this place in what is the Sudan today. These people from the Sudan have taken over all of Egypt. This is one of the times where we know Egypt is actually ruled by sub-Saharan Africans, which is sort of an interesting thing. It's not the rule. This is sort of the exception rather than the rule. But this is one time when we know that that Egypt is being ruled over by sub-Saharan Africans, these guys from the Sudan that have come up and taken everything over. And so when he says that these Ethiopians and these other guys are going to come in chains, why are they in chains? They're in chains because the Assyrians have taken them captive. And this happens a few times. At one point, they just go in and push the Egyptians and the Cushites out of southern Canaan, out of the southern Israel area, but sometimes they actually will come in and physically capture Egypt. We think of Egypt as being this big independent power, but actually the Assyrians conquered it. So this actually starts to make quite a bit of sense, honestly, when we really look at this. So there's some pretty fun and interesting things going on here in this chapter, in this whole section, as far as all this stuff goes. So when you see it in this context, you're like, well, yeah, this is clearly the Assyrian conquest of Babylon, not the Persian conquest of Babylon. A lot of people don't know about this, and they know about the later one, and so they read Isaiah and they just assume he's talking about the later conquest of Babylon, when actually he's almost certainly talking about this early Assyrian conquest, and taking the opportunity to sort of make fun of the Babylonians, and that's what we're getting here in 47. He says, "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground. There is no throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal. Uncover thy locks, make bare the leg, uncover the thigh. Pass over the rivers. Thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man. As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. Sit thou silent, and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. So what is he talking about here? We remember earlier, he's saying, come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Well, this reminds us of what's happening earlier, where Israel is the one sitting down in the dust, right? But now it's happening to Babylon. It is interesting to me that here we are getting a sort of reprise of what happened earlier, but he's tweaked it slightly to refer to Babylon. I think I've mentioned to you before the connection between the plays of Shakespeare, that he goes through for a while and he's writing his plays, and they're pretty good, and then something happens in the middle of Henry IV, Part 2. This is probably the death of Hamnet, his son, and then we move on, and after that, he will re-gift things from early on, but his tone has changed, right? And I think that that's what we're seeing here. He's re-gifting something from earlier. This is very similar to what we've gotten earlier in Isaiah, but it's Babylon instead of Israel, and the tone has changed, right? Because things are different now. I think his family is dead at this point. So he says, come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground. There is no throne. So you have to sit on the ground in the dust, because there's no throne anymore. Everything's been destroyed. O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. So Babylon used to be this great place with these great thrones and this high society. It's been pretty well trashed by the Assyrians at this point. It says, take the millstones and grind meal. Then this was a task for slaves, is you're grinding with these millstones. And these are pretty heavy millstones. This is considered to be a woman's job in some cases, certain kinds of millstones, where you have a sort of a funnel-like thing on top that's made out of stone, and then there's a hole in the stone that goes down to another kind of funnel-like thing underneath, and then on the bottom you've got this conical stone. So you drop this big old stone on top, and then you just turn it, and you dump the grain on top, and the flour comes out at the bottom, and a whole lot of grit, right? But that's how these people are grinding their bread, is with these big old stones. And you can still see these in the Middle East today, all these black basalt millstones up there in the north, and they're just grinding round and round and grinding this grain. It's a very tough job, but this is what you would have female slaves do if you had the luxury of having slaves, and that's the implication here. It says, uncover thy locks. Once again, you're not supposed to, in many instances in ancient Israel, you're not necessarily supposed to have your heads uncovered. They would often have head coverings, women would, but he's saying you're slaves now, you have actually no clothes. You're uncovering your hair, you're uncovering your legs, you're uncovering everything, uncover the thigh, it's like literally everything, and pass over the rivers. You've been stripped naked because you're a slave, and you've been sent over the rivers into captivity. Now, what does that mean, pass over the rivers? This is literally passing to get from all the way out there in the Babylon area to get back to Assyria. You have to cross over the rivers, right? And you can picture that on the map, that you have to at some points cross over. You've got the Tigris and Euphrates out there that at some point you have to cross to get actually to Nineveh. And we know a lot of these people are in Nineveh itself. And actually, to get from Babylon to Nineveh, you have to cross over both the Tigris and the Euphrates going up straight north. So hence, pass over the rivers. It says, thy nakedness shall be uncovered. Once again, you have to be stripped naked. As a slave, you're stripped naked and then sent to wherever you're going to go. Yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance. I will not meet thee as a man. So he's saying, listen, you guys have worshipped these idols. The Babylonians have worshipped these idols. That's not ending well for them. They're being punished for this. God is taking vengeance upon them for this. He says, I will not meet thee as a man. Or in other words, we're not going to sit down and talk about this, right? This is my decree. This is what's happened. And then he says, by contrast, as for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. So and once again, the idea of being bought out of slavery is here. A redeemer is one that buys people out of slavery. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. These Babylonians are going to have a really tough time. They're being sent into slavery. But God is going to buy the Israelites, the Holy One of Israel, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies, the powerful, strong One of Israel. He's going to buy you out of slavery and bring you back. But that's not going to happen for the Babylonians. That's why it says, "Sit thou silent and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms." There's this idea of this sort of beautiful, sophisticated Babylon. That's just not how it is anymore. "Sitting thou silent and get thee into darkness," literally get into the sort of pits that they would sometimes throw these people in, into darkness. Your old life is over. And then in 6 it says, "I was wroth with my people. I have polluted mine inheritance, and given them into thine hand. Thou didst show them no mercy. Upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid thy yoke." Well, what does this mean here? I think this verse here, you'll notice that this verse kind of doesn't make sense. It kind of is out of place. Let me just pull it out and read it to you, everything else. "Sit thou silent and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. And thou hast said, I shall be a lady forever." Right, so you're not going to be called the Lady of Kingdoms anymore. You said you were going to be a lady forever, but you're not going to be. Right, so it actually is fine without 6. So what is 6 doing there? Now remember how I said before that what is called Deutero-Isaiah has some late biblical Hebrew in it? It's not all late, but there's some late biblical Hebrew in it, suggesting it's been edited. I think this line is probably an insertion, because it works just fine without it. The whole thing works just fine without it. But if this is written after the Babylonian captivity, during the early Persian period, or even in the captivity, as a lot of people think this is written while they're in Babylon, then actually this works fine. At least some of it's written while they're in Babylon, although this has got to be after the captivity, some of these edits. But it says, "I was wroth with my people and have polluted mine inheritance and given them into thine hand," the Babylonians, right? Because that does happen in 586. "Thou didst show them no mercy. Upon the ancients thou hast very heavily laid thy yoke." So actually this makes sense not to be talking about, we're thinking this is some kind of a prophecy of the future. I don't think so. This is probably an insertion, because it works just fine without it, honestly. So here, if this is an insertion, which I think it probably is, then whoever is doing this insertion is saying, God has delivered us into the hands of the Babylonians, and they didn't show any mercy upon anyone, even upon old people. They've put the yoke upon them. So that is indeed what would happen. But if we pull this out and say, okay, it says, we're talking about, "Thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms, and thou didst say," and thou saidest, you can say, "But you said," right? "But you said, I shall be a lady forever. So that thou didst not lay these things to thy heart, neither didst remember the latter end of it." And you said, you're not going to be a lady anymore, even though you said, I'm going to be a lady forever. Everything's going to be fine for me. Babylon's never going to have any problems. And you didn't take seriously the struggles. You didn't take seriously any kind of chastisement to make you repent. You didn't remember the latter end of it. You didn't get the full picture of what had happened over the whole time and say, maybe I should change my ways. You never did that. Let's keep going here. He says, "Therefore hear now this, thou that art given to pleasures, that dwellest carelessly, that sayest in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. But these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon thee in their perfection, for the multitude of thy sorceries, and for the great abundance of thine enchantments." So he's saying, okay, so hear this now, you that are given to pleasure, you who just care about pleasure. You dwell carelessly. You just sit there without care in the world. Can you say to your heart, I am and none else beside me? And remember, he's talked about that with God. God says, I am and none else besides me. But here he's saying Babylon is saying, I am and there's none else beside me. I'm never going to be a widow. I'm never going to know the loss of children. Nothing bad is ever going to happen to me. There's no calamity that's ever going to hit me. He said, but really? I says, really? These things are going to happen to you in a moment, in one day. The loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon thee in their perfection, or in their completeness. For the multitude of thy sorceries, and for the great abundance of thine enchantments. As Babylon is known for sort of sorcery, enchantment, witchcrafty stuff, because they were really, really good at astronomy and therefore astrology, and so there was this idea that they were sort of sorcerers. And in fact, later on, the word Chaldean is literally just the word for sorcerer. That's what it means later in later biblical Hebrew. But here, he's saying, actually, all these things are going to happen to you. And that's why I wonder if he's actually talking about if this is post-destruction of Babylon by the Assyrians, or if this is right before it happens. Because he's saying these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day. So it could be that this is right before it happens, and Isaiah is calling it, saying, the Assyrians are going to come in and wipe you out, actually, right? So it's hard to know which is which. Once again, the past tense and future tense in some of this stuff is a little bit tricky, and so it could be, but these two things have come to you in a moment, in one day. You said this was never going to happen, but it happened. So he might be calling it right before it happens, or he might be calling it, or he might be talking about after it's happened. It's hard to say. He's saying, you are going to have all your people deported, and everybody's going to get wiped out because of what you've done. And he says, for thou hast trusted in thy wickedness. Thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge it hath perverted thee. And thou hast said in thine heart, I am and none else beside me. He says, for thou hast trusted in thy wickedness. You have relied on your own wickedness to save you, but said, oh, no one's seeing that I'm doing all these bad things. Because all your wisdom, these Babylonians are known for their wisdom, like I said, in astronomy and other things. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge it hath perverted thee. And thou hast said in thine heart, I am and none else beside me. Saying, you guys think that your knowledge is going to save you. It's not going to save you. At the end of the day, it's going to lead you high and dry. There's nothing necessarily bad about knowledge and wisdom. But without faith, it's not going to do you any good. If you say, in your wisdom, I am the best, I am and none else beside me, I know all these things and no one else does, that's a problem. And you're going to get punished for it, in other words. Let's finish here. Therefore shall evil come upon thee, and thou shalt not know from whence it riseth. And mischief shall fall upon thee, thou shalt not be able to put it off. And desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know. Stand now with thine enchantments, and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth. If so be thou shalt be able to profit, if so be thou mayest prevail. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee. Behold, they shall be as stubble. The fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame, and there shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit before it. Thus shall they be unto thee with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. They shall wander every one to his quarter, none shall save thee. So because they have relied on their own knowledge and not on God, therefore shall evil come upon them. Thou shalt not know from whence it riseth. They'll look around one day and realize everything has just gone to pot, and that they will not have been expecting it at all. Mischief or ruin will fall upon you, and you won't be able to put it off. Desolation will come upon you suddenly, which thou shalt not know. They'll just be sitting around minding their own business, and suddenly, like that, desolation is going to hit them. The Assyrians are going to come out of nowhere and hit them, and that's exactly what happens. Stand now with thine enchantments and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth. Okay, great. So now, try to use your enchantments and sorcery and see if that's going to save you. You've been doing it your whole life. You should be good at it by this point. Let's see if it saves you. If it so be thou shalt be able to profit, if it so be thou mayest prevail. So let's see. Okay, great. You've been doing it for a long time. You should be able to make it profit you. You should be able to make it work. And then you can win using magic. But obviously that's not going to happen. He says, thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. I kind of like the snarkiness of this, honestly. It's sort of funny. Great. You guys are great at magic. Okay, let's see how your magic does for you, right? You've been doing this for a long time. Let's see if it works. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. You've been talking about this and going back and forth about this forever so that you're like exhausted by it. He says, let now the astrologers, the stargazers, once again, Babylon is really famous for all of this. Astrology, astronomy, that's stargazers, monthly prognosticators, using the future, trying to figure out the future by the use of these things. Let all these people stand up and save you from these things that shall come upon you. Okay, you guys are really great at astronomy and astrology and stuff. Great. Have them stand up and save you now. Let's see how that's going to go for you. Behold, they shall be as stubble. The fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit before it. In other words, you guys are going to be wiped out like stubble in a field. Right? When you mow down a field, there's the little bit of straw at the bottom that people just burn to prepare the field for the next year. That's the image. They're going to be burned like that. And, of course, you have to remember this is what happens to Babylon. Cities in the ancient world, they get torched. And you can see the ash layer even. So Babylon's going to be destroyed by the Assyrians. The fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. It says, there shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit before it. Because sometimes they would. This is the idea of these people. They are sitting in front of the fire, sort of peacefully. So there's the contrast of this, sitting peacefully in front of the fire, maybe doing some things related to predicting the future via fire, and then saying, you guys are going to get wiped out by a huge fire. You're not going to be sitting in front of a cute little fire. You're going to get wiped out by a big fire. And the fire is going to be the destruction of Babylon. Thus shall they be unto thee with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. They shall wander every one to his quarter. None shall save thee. This part is a little bit confusing here. And to understand this, we have to understand the historical context. In the ancient Near East, it was common for people to have quarters in their cities for people from other merchants from other nations. So you'll have, in Babylon, you'll have sort of the Assyrian quarter for the Assyrian merchants. You'll have the Syrian section for the Syrian merchants. That's the idea. So thus shall it be unto thee with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. So these Assyrians that have lived in your town ever since you were small, in their own quarter, the Assyrian quarter of the city, these merchants, Assyrian merchants in the Assyrian quarter of the city, you've known these people since you were kids. But they will go back to their own quarter of the city. They're not going to help you. The Assyrians are going to come in, they're going to kill you, and these Assyrian merchants that you've known since you were a kid are not going to help you. They're just going to watch everything else burn. That's pretty disturbing. But that's what he's getting at here. This is a pretty brutal chapter. This is maybe one of the more disturbing parts of Isaiah. Him sort of making fun of all the bad things that are going to happen to the Babylonians and stuff. But this is really what's happening. And we're going to get some really good, in the next chapter 48, we're going to get some really good additions in the Book of Mormon that help to explain some of these things. The Book of Mormon version is probably a little bit better. Like I said, there's some xenophobia happening with some of these later editors that are they just hate these people from these other countries. Isaiah is a little bit more even-handed, probably originally, than some of these later editors are saying, yeah, these bad things are going to happen to these people if they don't repent. Here it's just like, well, everything bad is going to happen to you. Sorry. Right? And I'm not sure that's the full picture. I think if the Book of Mormon's any indication, Isaiah was saying this stuff in hopes of it getting back to these people to say, hey guys, you guys better watch out. And that is why I think this may be right before the Babylonians come in, or excuse me, right before the Assyrians come into Babylon and not right after. Because then it sort of makes more sense. Because he's saying, okay, guys, if you guys don't repent, this stuff is going to happen to you. And the next chapter makes it even more clear. We're actually talking about some stuff with Babylon in the next chapter. And when you all take it all together, it actually does start to make some sense. But I think for this, we have to say, yeah, what he's saying to Babylon is true. That if people don't repent, they are going to have a hard time. And I think from a broader perspective, we have to think about that ourselves. If we don't repent, we're going to have a rough time. And so, yeah, this is very uncomfortable. But we have to realize that he's right. And that this stuff still applies to us today. If you don't want bad things to happen to you, you need to repent. That doesn't mean bad things aren't going to happen to you anyway. And Isaiah will talk about that more later. But it pays to repent. So anyway, that's it for this time. It's 47. And we'll get into some more Book of Mormon chapters, a big chunk of Book of Mormon chapters. The rest, actually, of what they call Deutero-Isaiah is in the Book of Mormon, 48 through 55. And so we'll be able to go through all of that and look carefully at it all and sort of analyze it. And so that'll be very nice. But good to be with you all today, and we'll see you guys next time.